Welcome, I'm delighted to be here with you. In today's session, I'm going to be showing you a very simple way, a very practical way, and a very easy to replicate way of making that step towards your financial future and what you want from life. I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to have to use some of these assumptions to make this as practical as I can. One of the examples that I'm going to use is to show you how anyone can begin the journey towards creating wealth. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how. I'm going to lay down the fundamental principles and the philosophies and the strategies of how you can achieve financial freedom in 10 years or less. My first assumption will be that you already are aware of where you are. And by this, I simply mean that you have clarity on two things. Number one, you know what your net worth is. Number two, you know what your wealth worth is. Now, if you're not familiar with both concepts, you may want to listen to some of my older videos about wealth and the difference between net worth and wealth worth. The second assumption I'm going to make is that you have a dream of financial freedom, but more importantly, that you have a compelling reason, and preferably a number of those reasons to help you push through the obstacles that you might face along the journey towards financial wealth and prosperity. I believe that if you have a strong enough compelling reason, then you can achieve any goal. As a matter of fact, with a compelling reason, you can endure any obstacles or distractions or setbacks you encounter along your journey. Now, to make this practical, we're going to make this very numeric. We're going to be using examples. So here is my first assumption. I'm going to assume in this example that you have a net income of £2,000 every single month. Let's assume this is what we're working with, because in many cases, whenever I have a session, a seminar, a conference, a lot of people say your ideas are really interesting and they're unique, but do they work for the average person? Do they work for someone who isn't earning much? Now, the minimum wage is in London is about £7.50. I believe if you're above 18, between 18 and 21 years, I believe. Now, this simply means that every single year you have about £14,000 estimated. Now, I could be wrong in the final numbers, but you get the drift. But what I'm trying to do here is show you that even with a minimum wage salary, you can still create a wealthy lifestyle. It's not the amounts that you earn that counts, it's what you do with what you earn. Now, going back to the example that I started with of £2,000, anyone who wants to become financially free in less than 10 years must apply a principle that I call 65-35. The 65-35 plan. This plan simply states that you must discipline yourself to live on 65% of your income. Now, in this example, this is equivalent to 1,300. Now, it says the 35%, which is the balance, you must invest. Now, this is equivalent to £700. Now, I know that most of you watching now are already getting discouraged because you're thinking about 65% and you're probably saying to yourself, I can't live on 65% of what I earn because I have too many commitments. Stay with me. What I'd like you to do is simply have a mindset that is open to some of the ideas I want to share. And what you find as we go along, I'll show you how you can make this not only viable, but how you can make it very easy to apply in your life. Now, we've established a few things. We've said £2,000 is what you income. We've said your investment will be £700, which is 35%. We've said your budget will be 1,300, which is 65%. Now, with this established, now let's move very quickly to the next stages of what to do. You see, wealth is created as a result of a number of reasons. One of the reasons is the appropriate allocation of resources. That is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to establish the resources you have. But it's also created as a result of recognizing opportunities and being aware when the opportunities show up so you can take advantage of it. Now, this is the formula for wealth, and this is the formula that I recommend you follow. There is a formula for wealth that I call WEIS. This is so powerful and simple, it can change your entire financial destiny. This formula says that the wealthy earn, and once they've earned, the first thing they do is they invest. Once they've invested, now they can spend. But interestingly, they spend in a way that they apply a budget and they try to live below that budget so that they can reinvest. So in many cases, you find that some of them are still able to push some saving to the side so that they can rechannel that into investing. But this is the basic formula for wealth. It's not about what you earn, it's about what you do with what you earn. Contrast this with the way I used to live before. The way I lived before, I called it the poverty lifestyle. I used to earn, and the first thing I would do would be to spend, and then whatever I had left, I would save. So I had earn, spend, and save. Now the problem with this was that I always had expenses that were greater than my income. So at the end of the month, I spent it all and more, and therefore I had nothing to save. So for years, I had a net worth that was less than zero. And it wasn't until I started to discipline myself to focus on investing first. Now, why am I explaining this to you? I'm explaining this simply because we started this example with the allocation of resources, and I said 35% must be allocated to investing, 65% is a budget that you live on. Now, what do you do with this 35% allocation? Good question. Here is my recommendation. 10% you give to charity, 5% you invest in your mind, invest in yourself. 10% is what we call active investments. 10% is what we call passive investments. Now, this is so simple, but it's very, very profound. You want to give some of what you have away because giving attracts more. And all wealthy people are generous. As a matter of fact, there's something called the law of receiving that says the more you give, the more you will receive. So give what you have away. Now, you may not really be able to start with 10%. And all of these numbers here are just guidelines for achieving financial freedom in 10 years or less. If you cannot start with these, you can begin where you want. You can start with 1%, 1%, 2%, 2%. It's not the amount that counts, it's the habits. You see, through consistency, you achieve your dreams. Commitment gets you going. Consistency ensures that you achieve your dreams. Now, once you've invested, and I call this an investment because you're investing in other people, and you've put in 5% to invest in yourself. Now, most people don't get this. Now, this 5% is simply £100 per month. I think you must invest in books. You must invest in recordings in terms of seminars, webinars, audio, video. Invest in yourself. Now, every farmer understands this principle. At the end of the harvest, the farmer takes a portion of the seed, puts the seed corn aside for the next season. You can't spend everything you earn. You've got to reinvest in your mind because your mind creates everything you have. 10% you're going to use for active investments and 10% you're going to use for passive investments. Now, the passive investment is where we get into the asset allocation I'm talking about. Active investment means you find something that you have a passion for, that you want to invest in, maybe for the long term. This could be real estate, it could be property, or it could be commodities, it could be bonds, stocks, mutual funds, it could be a business. The other 10% of your passive, you distribute this in such a way that you ensure that in the event of this 10% active investment going wrong, that you're secure. So we have what we call growth, secure or security, and we have something we call safety. Growth means that you have a level of investment set aside for opportunities that have a potential to grow. The return may not be very attractive, but it's reliable. And this is where, for example, in my recommendation, I think things such as real estate, depending on your location, could be a lucrative investment where you can look back at the last 15 years and you can see a consistent rate of return for properties. And therefore, depending on the plans for the area in terms of infrastructure, in terms of jobs, in terms of education, you have an idea about what the future might be. So in this case, you might find a place where you get a 6% return. So you might decide that out of the 10% that you're going to dedicate 4% of that to growth. For security, what we say here is simply, you need between 12 months of expenses set aside. Now, if that's too much for you, you can go down to 6 months of expenses set aside to ensure that in the event of, for whatever reason, if there is a loss of job, if there is ill health, if there is any catastrophic, unforeseen circumstance that happens, you have security, that you're not losing your focus. Because the most important thing is for you to maintain your focus as you start to build wealth. And finally, the safety plan is about the future. How do you protect the future? If you're starting your journey, there are two ways to do this. Number one, you could decide to invest in a pension scheme. A pension scheme is safe, but I will qualify the statement I just made about investing in a pension scheme, because a pension scheme is a savings scheme. It's not an investment scheme. You're holding money for the long term for too long. Unfortunately, it's wrong strategy for investing. Investors don't do that. Investors don't hold money in a currency form for that long. Why? Because the purchasing power of the currency declines or depreciates, but also they have no control of the money. They have no control of their assets. So a pension scheme is something you do for the long term. It could be a good way of securing the future, just in case all of your plans for investing do not work. You want to make sure that you have enough to keep you going at the later age. Now, you might decide to put in maybe about 5% once you've securely established your security bucket. You might put in 5% into your pension. If your company offers a matched contribution, then that's 10%. Now, check this out so you can understand how powerful this is. If your company matches your 5%, now you have 10%. 10% of £2,000 is £200. £200 per month over 12 months is £2,400. If you invested £200 in an investment vehicle that paid 10% return over 50 years, you would have about 1.3 million pounds in 50 years, meaning that you have enough. Now, this 1.28 pounds, if you took this and put it in another investment that paid 10%, that could pay you £128,000 every single year when you retire. So it's a great way of securing the future. Now, I will qualify this by saying that the 1.28 pounds, obviously, I haven't taken into account deductions for fees, deductions for taxes, and other expenses that are associated with finally closing that account. So the point I'm making with this is the long-term safety decision is important, but if you do it strategically and if you do it consistently, what you find is that at the end of your working lifetime, you can have something as much as £100,000 plus to ensure that you can maintain just the basic level of living. It may not be enough at that time, but it's much better than having nothing. Your key focus is really your passive, and once you've established, in this case, a portfolio for safety, a portfolio for security, and one for growth, you can channel any balance into the passive investment fund to ensure that you can find an investment vehicle that ensures that you achieve your financial freedom within 10 years. That is how you allocate and distribute your resources. Now, I hope that's been useful. I hope it's been informative. Now, you might be thinking, okay, how do I begin and where do I start? That's the decision I'm going to have to leave to yourself. I'm going to have to leave that to you, but I'll say this to you. Make things easy on yourself by automating the entire process. If you're going to take out 65% and set it aside as your budget, then make it as automatic as you can. Deduct the 35% as soon as you get paid automatically. Have it distributed into the various accounts. Have it invested automatically so that you're not requiring willpower and discipline to do all of that. Now, the 65% will require some clever ideas on your part. And what I found is that if you allow your creativity to soar, you'll be surprised at the level of great ideas you can come up with. And you'll find that a 65% is something you can live on. Now, my recommendation is sometimes you might have to start small. And in starting small, you got to recognize that there's no shame in that. You know, you might decide that you can only afford 1% and you must have 99% for your livelihood. That is okay. That is okay. Don't worry about the percentages. Start where you are. You can start with 1%, and every month you increase it by another 1%, and every month another 1%. By the end of the year, you would have increased it by 12%. That is how you start. Now, I hope that's been useful. I wish you the best. God bless.